What are we whispering about?
And when I started doing that, I looked at the images and I saw a fairy. And I was like, oh my goodness, this is exciting. But it was one fairy, so I didn't do much of it. And then I did it, I kept looking at these images, did a few more, and another one popped up. And then another one. By the time it got to 3, that was when I knew exactly what my project was going to be about, and how exciting that was. Kind of calling them fairies here, but I actually thinking of them more as fairy figurines, the kind of things that fairies would make, in the same way that humans in the past have made figurines to represent themselves and their cultures.
In the air, by the sea, from the land, and within you and me. Fairies are whispering. Have you been coloured, confused, completely captivated, and craving clarity? This is Claire Casely, and I am a fairy whisperer. To catch a whisper, you have to listen closely. Listen with me. Hello and welcome to the Fairy Whispering Podcast. I'm your host, Claire Casely. And before I introduce my guest for this episode, some news to tell you that I have a new URL for my website, which is www.thefairywhispering.com. It's something that I've wanted to change for a while. And my new email address is claire@thefairywhispering.com. But you can still use my Gmail address, clairefairywhisperer@gmail.com. Either of those if you want to contact the show. And to follow the show on social media, you can find me on Instagram and on Facebook at Fairy Whispering Podcast, and my YouTube channel is Fairy Whispering. My guest for this episode is Jessica Holmes, who is a 3D artist and archaeologist who creates art based on the landscape of Heysham Head in the northwest of England. What I love about Jessie's art is that it resonates with my creative process, and I'm sure others of my listeners, where I create mirrored images of elements of nature and the landscape, which reveal fairy faces and figures and all sorts of creatures. And Jess is going to share with us her particular process, which incorporates 3D art. Jess has created a film connected with her project on YouTube, and I've put the link to this in the notes for the show, and also on the podcast blog, thefairywhispering.com. I'm sure you'll enjoy our chat and find it very intriguing. Thanks for listening. Welcome, Jessie.
Oh, thank you, Claire. So very excited to be here. This is my first time doing a podcast, so extremely excited about it. We're actually over in the northwest of England, in Morecambe, just near the Lake District. And I'm excited to be talking to you as a fellow artist and fairy enthusiast as well. So this is going to be really fun.
I just want to read what you've said on your blog as an intro to project, because I thought these words really resonated with me. There are some places in the world that seem to reside outside of time, where we can engage with nature and history and allow it to soak into our minds and refresh our spirits. Heysham Head is one such place of intense magic.
It's a very complex site. As you walk around it, there are a lot of visual clues on that site to the heritage and your ancestry, a lot of different myths going on across time. So it really does feel like a magical space. And I use it, I think, as a refuge from the world a little bit. And, it's one of those places where you go and it does just refresh you for a while, and then you can kind of come back into the world again afterwards. But it's a fabulous place.
And I'd love to hear more about the place, and also more about your project.
Art is a process, and I've been working at Heysham Head for about 6 months, and my artwork has changed a lot over that time as I've kind of discovered new things and developed different things. So I think when I started the project, I really had everything a bit topsy-turvy. Everything was the wrong way around. I kind of came across the fairies quite early on, fairy references on the site. But in my head, I kind of discounted them early on because I just thought I've just got nothing new to say about fairies. So there's an awful lot out there. I mean, what would I say that would be new? And so my focus at the start was all about the mythologies on the site and legends associated with the site. And I was really interested in kind of weaving together the Celtic mythologies. Obviously, we have a port that takes us over to the Isle of Man and to Ireland, Northern Ireland. So weaving in that with the Viking heritage on the site. We have a chapel that's associated with Viking. It was built during the Viking period. We also have a hogback tombstone in the local church next door to the chapel, which tells of the tale of a Viking saga. And so these were the things that were predominant in my mind when I first started. But it quite quickly became apparent, and I'm sure you're already aware of this, that actually if you look into the mythologies around Ireland and England and the Norse mythologies, they're already really mixed together. You find a lot of the same characters, or slight variations of characters cropping up time and time again. So I kind of hit a bit of a brick wall really with it, and I didn't know what to do. I went to the graffiti site. So on the coastline at Heysham Head, we have a 10-metre squared area of sandstone pavement that's been, over the years, over about 100 years, people have come along, visitors to the site, and they've added their names or initials and dates to that site. And they've also, on occasion, drawn little symbols and motifs. So there's a beautiful little cartoon face. There's a compass. There's a horseshoe. There's all sorts of these different motifs. The one that really excited me was a prehistoric style labyrinth that had been carved on the rocks. And I thought, well, I'm going to use this as my influence. So I just kind of took loads of photographs, started recording it for posterity. And that's where my blog started. That's why it's called Save the Heysham Head Rock. And I just started playing with these photographs. And first of all, I was just applying filters and things like that. And then eventually I stumbled across a particular filter that adds polar coordinates to images, but also reflects them at the same time. And when I started doing that, I looked at the images and I saw a fairy. And I was like, oh my goodness, this is exciting. But it was one fairy, so I didn't think too much of it. And then I did it, I kept looking at these images, did a few more, and another one popped up. And then another one. By the time it got to 3, that was when I knew exactly what my project was going to be about, and how exciting that was. Kind of calling them fairies here, but I actually thinking of them more as fairy figurines, the kind of things that fairies would make in the same way that humans in the past have made figurines to represent themselves and their cultures. This is what I'm seeing these images as. And so I ended up finding out of 75 photographs of different bits of graffiti. I found about 20 or so fairies within them, fairy figurines, all very diverse and unique and interesting to look at. And so I'm a 3D artist. I work with 3D modeling. So I modeled these fairy figurines as little 3D objects. And that's when the whole project just came to life. That was it. That was the kind of hook for me. And I've just been obsessed with fairies ever since. So I'm trying. It's only a few months ago. I'm still learning, very much learning, about fairy history and fairy history on the site. But I'm just getting obsessed with it. I love it.
I love that process because it's a process that I use myself.
Great. I think it's really important for artists to just step back and just be playful for a while and see what happens. Yeah, absolutely.
Definitely. It's something that I do very intuitively. What I start to notice when I'm in a mindful place in nature on my walks, I'll see like an eye on a tree, or I think, oh, that looks like half a face, or that looks like an interesting symbol. What would it look like if I mirrored it?
Yeah. I mean, for me, I think it comes out of trying to get into the mindset of past peoples.
Yeah.
I feel like we've lost an awful lot, especially when you go back and look at a lot of the literature from the kind of from the 14th to the 19th century or so. They were vividly real. The sense of magic in the landscape and the supernatural in the landscape. And so I really try to kind of put myself into that mindset as much as possible and look at the landscape through past people's eyes, as much as I can. That's something that really interests me, trying to get into the mindset of people that see the landscape in that way. Aside all of our kind of reasoning and scientific learning and all that kind of stuff, and forget about it for a while and just really enjoy the wonder of the landscape and what the stories that it tells you as you walk through it. It's so exciting.
Could you tell me about some of these places that are in the photos?
Sure. It's one of those places there is so much I'm going to have to edit in my mind because we've been here for a week. But so as you approach Heysham Head, you go up a little ginnel, and on the right there's a beautiful old church called St. Peter's Church. It's got a Saxon doorway in the northern apse, I think, or the western apse. So it's got a very ancient origin. I think it's contemporary. The first phase is contemporary with the chapel at the hill. And inside the church, there's a hogback tombstone, as I said, a hogback stone, a Viking stone. And on one side of that stone, there is a depiction of the tale of Sigmunda in the Völuspá saga. And on the other side of the stone is depicted the story of his son Siguro. I think that's how you say it. And this whole story, if anybody's interested, is referenced by John Thor Ewing. There was a paper about it explaining the whole, all of the references of the pictures on the stone. So there's some beautiful bits of it. So curved around the top of the stone, there's the giant world serpent, so Jormungandr, curls around the top. And then on one side, it's all about the stories, is about how Sigmundr is been kidnapped by his sister's husband. And he's left in the woods with his 9 brothers. And each night, one night after the other, a giant she-wolf comes along and gobbles one up, the brothers, until there's only Sigmundr left. And then his sister takes pity on him and brings him some honey, and he smears it all over his face and his chest. And when the she-wolf comes along, she starts licking the honey, and he is able to attack her while she's distracted. And he kills her and manages to escape. So there's these incredible stories already woven into this stone. So that's well worth investigating. Then as you go further up the hill, there is the chapel on the right. The chapel was originally a Saxon chapel built in wood. It was rebuilt probably in the 10th century by Viking settlers in Heysham who'd just been Christianized. And then it was rebuilt again, I think, in the 11th century, so probably around the time of the Norman conquest. This is beautiful little chapel ruin. There's about half of it left, but there's a gorgeous little rounded top door still visible. And it's overlooking some really mysterious rock-cut graves. There's a set of 6, it's a big set, and they're of different forms. Some of them have kind of a shroud form, so they're quite rounded. There's a rectangular one, and then there's 3 or 4 that have the head and shoulders cut into the rock. So I think they did some tests and discovered that you couldn't fit a body into them. So the body must have gone through some kind of process. If there were bodies in there originally, the body must have gone through some kind of a process where the flesh was removed and the bones were put in as separate, like disarticulated skeletons. So that's very interesting, and it would have been capped originally. There's a second set of rock-cut graves just a little bit further to the east, which is an adult and a child's one. There's a small one. So they're really interesting and good kind of inspiration. The whole thing overlooks the bay, so it's got this beautiful kind of lofty view, and probably it would have been created for people of quite high status in the area. And then at the head of each grave, there's a socket, like a rectangular socket, and either this was for ritual deposits of some kind, or it might have held a cross. And then, so that's overlooking a field that leads down to the shoreline, and that field is called the Barrows. Right, yeah. And, obviously references there to potentially some kind of Bronze Age ring barrows, perhaps, or maybe Saxon or Viking ship burials, something like that. But nothing's ever been discovered. So it might just have been called the Barrows because it looked as though there were barrows on that. It's quite lumpy and bumpy. And back in the 70s, I think it was, they did a big excavation directly below the chapel, and they found thousands and thousands of Mesolithic flint tools. It's turned out that it was one of the most important open-air occupation sites for the Mesolithic in Britain. But I have no idea what's happened to any of these artefacts. There was one kind of excavation report that was really, really poor. I don't think that there was a few drawings of some of the flint tools, and that's basically all that they included. And so that's the kind of the Barrows area. And so it's obviously got kind of, I don't know, it feels like it's been an important site of kind of ritual purpose for tens of thousands of years because of this association right back to the Mesolithic. Up on the hillside, right at the top, there's Rectory Woods, and this was built as a garden. Originally, it's got a really high boundary wall, so when you enter it through this kind of, I call it the fairy door, but it's this slot opening that you walk through in this huge wall. You enter something where the sounds are very muted. It feels very secluded and quiet and peaceful in there. It was actually used as a place where soldiers after World War II could go and find respite and solace, peace and quiet. So it's a very healing place. As you walk around, the first thing that you come across is a giant erratic boulder that's been carved into a seat, a bench, probably I think in the Victorian period. And when I looked at the side of this, I noticed a giant's head. So that's the one that I referenced on my website as a giant's head boulder. It looks like it's got eyes with eyelashes and a mouth as well. So it's quite a beautiful feature. And then you follow the path through the woods and you come across two stones with rectangular recesses cut into them. And these are known locally as the Druid's Altar. And they're associated with a curse. Do you want me to try and find the curse, or?
If you have it, that'd be great.
I think I've got it just here. So it's associated with the curse. It probably would have been written originally in Old Cumbric, which is the local Gaelic version of the language here from that period. But the curse reads, "Whose hand but once upon the altar lay, must farm the curse that ever lasts of those whose sinful price to pay." So it's quite it's quite a powerful curse or powerful bit of writing associated with them.
Yeah.
And then you continue on up the path, and there's an open space, a clearing with a cliff edge, and on one side of this there's a small cave that you can, or like a cave tunnel if you like, you can crawl right through it. And then there's big cliffs with graffiti sprayed on the sides and things like that. So we've kind of covered most of it, and then just down on the shoreline, just to finish off, because as I said, there's a lot. Just to finish off, there's two features that were known locally as the Fairy Chapel and the Fairy Bridge. There's some images of those on my website, and unfortunately these were lost in the 1920s because of quarrying locally. I imagine post-war people weren't as kind of occupied with preserving things. They just wanted to get rebuilding and thinking about that. So unfortunately they were lost, even though they played a really important part in Victorian visitors coming to Heysham. They really enjoyed that, visiting those sites. And those are associated very closely with the graffiti rock art site that I've already described. So there's an awful lot, and a very small area. It only takes about 15, 20 minutes to walk around, but you are almost bombarded with amazing monuments and relics as you walk around the site.
It's fascinating, isn't it? And
it really is.
It's really, this is the sort of thing that really fascinates me, and I know a lot of people that are listening will be interested too. I was going to come back to the labyrinth. Oh, before I do that, there was a word that you mentioned, ginnel.
Oh, right. Oh, yeah, of course, there's a bit of northern slang, isn't there?
What does that mean?
So we call it a ginnel. Over in Yorkshire, they call it a ginnel, I think, or maybe it's the other way around. I've lived in Yorkshire for quite a long time, so I get them mixed up now. But it's essentially it's a cobbled path with. If you think about the northern back-to-back houses, They often had a ginnel running down the middle of it. So you had your backyard, and then there was a ginnel that ran down the middle, and it was like a cobbled path. And then that would lead on to the next backyard and the next house. So yeah, we have ginnels, which are basically just small walkways through places, often cobbled.
I love these words. It's fascinating to hear the different words in different parts of the things. And the labyrinth. Have you heard of the Rocky Valley labyrinth in Cornwall?
I have. Is that 2 labyrinths there? Is it that side?
Yeah. I was there, back in, it was February.
Yeah, I think that's the closest match to our labyrinth in Heysham. As you've got 2 down there, but yeah, they're very similar. And I don't know though. I haven't been to the Rocky, the one down in Cornwall. Is it in a quite a secluded place, or is it?
It's secluded. It's near. It's on the road to Tintagel, basically.
Right.
You have to sort of turn off that road and park up at the side of the road, and it's about a 10-minute walk from the road down into this valley that goes down to the sea.
Yeah.
Which is interesting. So it's, alongside a river that is flowing out to sea.
Ah, interesting. So it's associated with water as well.
Yeah, associated with water, and it's kind of just on the wall of the rocks, the Rocky Valley. Yeah.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
I think we're heading down there this summer, so I'm going to try and grab some time there and get some photographs. That'll be brilliant to visit. Definitely.
That's fascinating. I didn't know that there were other labyrinths in other places. And that particular one, they're not sure if it's a modern.
No, I think I read that they thought that one was ancient and one was modern. I think I might be wrong on that, but that's my recollection of it, was that somebody's tried to kind of, there's an original, and then somebody's tried to copy it perhaps in more modern times. But it'd be great to do some dating on it and actually find out, because you can date these kind of things now with radiocarbon type dating.
I wonder what they mean. Do you have any ideas of?
Well,
one in Heysham is to do.
I think when I first came across it, my thought was that it was prehistoric and that it was perhaps put there as a kind of warning. So the bay where it's situated, our bay is crossed by 7 channels, and these channels move an awful lot. I think they move like 20 meters every year, and they're quite dangerous. We've had people caught up and cut off from the mainland by these channels because the sea comes in so quickly. So we're in a tidal estuary here in Morecambe, so the sea goes right out, and then twice a day obviously it comes rushing back in, and it can rush in very quickly.
Mm-hmm.
And so I did wonder whether at first whether it had been put there as a warning to people, some kind of symbolic warning of the nature of the bay itself. But then I read a paper by an archaeologist called George Nash, and he suggested that it was actually much more modern than prehistoric, that it was actually created in the Victorian period, right at that time when labyrinths and mazes were becoming very popular and fashionable. Because his reasoning was it was discovered in 1994, and it's eroded quite significantly since then. And so if it had any kind of great age, it probably wouldn't have lasted this long. Mm-hmm. So there are 2 periods where it could be. It's either prehistoric or it's Victorian. So most people opt for the more modern age to it. And he thought that it was all about, or he suggested it was perhaps put there to trap fairies. So the coastline is associated with fairies through a fairy chapel, which is that one of these lost features that I think I've mentioned.
Yes.
Yep. So it has these niches, humanoid shaped niches in the rock that are now gone, and the fairy bridge as well. And so he thought that perhaps it was part of some magical rite to try and trap fairies or to try and trap evil spirits, and that's why it was put there. So I thought that was really that's just as interesting, to be honest, as the prehistoric idea, I think. Yeah. So definitely some kind of ritual going on there, magic.
Yeah, because there's I was up in Scotland last summer on the Isle of Cumbrae, where a friend lives, and there's the remains of what was the Elf Bridge there.
Right.
It's now called Lion Rock, but I think it's just a small section of. It looks very similar to this because there are gaps, between pillars of rock.
Ah, interesting.
And apparently it used to be a lot longer, and was called the Elf's Dyke or Elf's Bridge.
I'll have a good look for that. Yeah, brilliant. I'll definitely search that out and see if presume what the comparisons are. That sounds really interesting.
Yeah, fascinating. And there'd be, I suppose, the Fairy Association comes from Victorian times. Is that right?
I think so. Yeah. We had a lot of so Heysham really Heysham's very close to Morecambe, and both of them became very popular during the Victorian and the Edwardian periods as bathing resorts and spas. It became, I think it was it Bonnie Prince? I can't remember now. It was a famous prince who had kind of made it fashionable to go bathing because he went to Brighton and he enjoyed it. And of course, if royalty enjoy it, it takes off amongst the kind of middle classes in the Victorian periods. And so it became very fashionable for Victorian ladies and gentlemen to go to seaside resorts and enjoy these kind of refreshing bathing experiences. And it was actually really heavily ritualized. So they had a special kind of master of ceremonies who would dictate to these people exactly when they could bathe, how long for, what they should eat beforehand. It was really heavily ritualized. And Heysham and Morecambe played a part in that. They were the northern kind of versions, and Blackpool as well to some extent. And so we had a lot of visitors at that point. Morecambe was heavily regenerated, and lots of large guest houses were put up at that point, and parks and things like that. And Heysham also attracted lots of visitors. And I think either there was already an association with fairies on the coastline, and people who was already named Fairy Chapel and Fairy Bridge, or the local tourist people said, we're going to call them Fairy Chapel and Fairy Bridge in order to attract more visitors. So I'm not quite sure which way around that goes, whether they're traditional names or names that were invented by the Victorians for that site, for those features.
Perhaps the local people, perhaps it's a combination, the local people to explain the unusualness of the site. Oh, that must be to do with the fairies. That's happened with many sites.
I think so.
Of the world, yeah.
I think so. I think it's probably more of a traditional name. It's such a, obviously the chapel and the graves were there from the 10th, 11th century. So it would have already had, very kind of spiritual meaning to people, that site. So I'd be surprised if it wasn't already associated with fairies, and the fairy names there.
Do you know what fairies are called in your part of the world?
We've had bogarts a lot. We get a lot of bogarts, and we do have a lot of references to bogarts in Morecambe Bay. Mm-hmm. There's a few stories associated with it. We have Jenny Greenteeth as well. Mm-hmm. And I think that those are the kind of regional names that I've come across so far. But fairies are called fairies here.
Yeah, you were saying, Jess, about recording sounds in the bogart holes.
Oh, yeah.
That's amazing.
Yeah, it's something that I've just come across through talking to Dr. Simon Young. He sent me a paper on bogarts locally. And within that paper, this article, there was a mention of these bogart holes. So I've just been researching them. And they're these amazing caves they're on the Pennines, so just to the east of us. And you can go and see them, and they're quite small caves, but out of them there are these beautiful little streams flowing, and as the stream flows, it echoes obviously within the cave, and it makes these really eerie and unusual sounds. So my plan is, as soon as the weather brightens up, because we've not got seaside weather here at the moment, I'm going to take a microphone and head out into the Yorkshire Dales and get some recordings of this. I think it's going to be great.
That sounds wonderful. That sounds like the sort of thing that'd be right up my street as well. Okay. I'm good. I just thought, what can I find?
Yeah. It's funny, there's a little story associated with them where apparently silver coins from some old king's reign pour out of these bogart holes on occasions as well, so maybe I'll get rich just going there too.
Wow, that's fantastic.
Yeah.
I'm looking at a postcard, which people listening, I'll put the link to Jessie's website in the notes for this show, but there's a postcard of Greece cottage with lots of little fairy figures. Is it a painting or is it?
I'm not sure. I think it's a photograph. I mean, I've seen kind of a few different versions of it. It's definitely a photograph, and I think it's a bit like the Cottingley Fairies. I think some enterprising person has created these little, but it's beautifully done, I have to say. You can sit there with a looking quite closely at it and not necessarily tell that they're not part of this photograph.
Yeah.
They're absolutely brilliant and are really enchanting and it's very Victorian and lovely. And I adore that photograph.
Yeah, it's wonderful. I saw it. Thought, oh wow, how enchanting!
Yeah, they're like, it's like a fairy procession, I think. And then there's all these little fellows sat on the walls and running around with a hoop and a stick, and playing games. And yeah, it just looks fantastic. You want to be in it. It's so nice.
Yeah, it's fantastic. And I was going to ask you about, Jess, on your website, you've got the elements of earth and water. And I was just reading you're going to add fire and air. And I just wondered how that fits into the project. So I didn't really have a chance to read in depth about that links in with what you're doing. So could you talk about that? Yeah,
so that stemmed from quite early on in my project. I spent some time just sitting in the landscape, trying to get to know it. I think that's really important. I grew up in Heysham, and I played at Heysham Head a lot as I was growing up, so I was very familiar with it, but not from an artist's point of view, if you know what I mean, from a kind of a recreational perspective. And I wanted to get to know it on a deeper level. So I just spent time there, just sitting and thinking about it in different places. And as I wandered around, I just started to associate. I kind of found that the landscape broke up into different parts. So Rectory Woods became earth, which was this very secluded, quiet space with muddy ground and dead leaves and the smells, and it was full of mushrooms and things like that. So it just kind of sang earth. And the chapel, which is on this lofty site, and it's very wind blown. You can see for miles from the chapel. That became air. And of course, you've got the seagulls. So that became air. And the Barrow fields, which run down to the coastline, there where you sit in the evening and you watch the sunset, and the whole landscape turns dark red and orange and pink. And it's very beautiful. And in winter, the bracken on the grasslands dies off, and that goes dark red as well. So that was very much fire for me. And the idea of Mesolithic campfires burning on the site and things like that. And then naturally, the coastline with its sounds of the sea, you can't access it a lot of the time because of if it's gotten wet, it becomes very slippy. So that became water. And that was just how I mentally started to think about the landscape and how I was going to kind of tackle a project within that landscape. Everything's so distinct and different, and it felt like it needed to have its own space. Really, that's where that came from.
I love that.
Thanks.
Yeah, I love that. And could you just, for people listening, Jess, so I love how you describe your process as excavating from photographs. I know you've sort of given us a description of that already, but just wondered if you could just try and explain how you're using these images to create the art.
Sure. So my background, I've been an artist for 10 years, but my background, and I went to university. I studied archaeology. I worked as an archaeologist for 15 years. So I have that's kind of one of my passions as well as art. And the process when I was looking at these photographs, you almost there's kind of a feature, but it's surrounded by other things. And when I look at it, it reminds me of a feature on an archaeological site where there's often you just find a dark patch, and that's the bit that you have to excavate out, but it's surrounded by soil. So everything kind of looks the same, and it takes a while to get your eye in to understand what's actually happening on a site. And so for me, looking at these photographs, and I look at a lot of them, that's how it feels. I'm looking for fairy artifacts within something that can be often quite complex visually, and it takes me a while just to sit and look at them and wait for the archaeology, if you like, to come out of the picture. So it's, for me, every image is a mini archaeological site where I'm just waiting to get my eye in and see what's there, and that's my process. I think that's what it feels like. It feels like archaeology when I find things in these images.
Yeah, and it's exciting, isn't it? I know from working with that mirroring process myself that it's really exciting, isn't it, when images start to leap out at you? And
it is, yeah. You suddenly got that sense of discovery, and there's always that kind of when you take some new photographs and you start going through the process of, oh, I wonder what I'm going to find today. It's got that same feeling of excitement that you get with archaeology. Of it's always unknown. You might not find anything, but when you do find something, it's like wow moment. And, oh, fantastic! And hopefully in the near future, we'll be able to develop an app where people will be able to take photographs and find archaeology for themselves.
Cool. Cool.
Yeah, I think
Yeah.
that would be great. And then maybe send us the images if they find fairies and things like that. Maybe we could start thinking about mapping some of these fairy figurines and things like that. So I want to try and get other people involved. It's such an exciting process. I do think a lot of people will really enjoy it. So yeah, that's the future plans. One of them.
Yeah, because sorry, forgive me if you've already said this, but you're taking the images and creating 3-dimensional models of them.
Yeah, I do that. My role is a virtual reality designer. That's kind of what I'm self-taught. I taught myself to do it. But I do 3D modeling and work in virtual reality, which is magic because you can create worlds that are very magical. And so hopefully people will be able to send me their images if they find fairies, and we'll have some kind of location on there, so we'll be able to find out exactly where they came from and things like that. And I've been creating for Heysham, because I've already found quite a lot of fairy archaeology for Heysham. I've created a museum, a virtual reality museum. It's the first stages. It's my first attempt at it, and I think it's one of those things I'm going to keep developing and keep improving, hopefully, and working on. But I can give you the link at the end for anybody who wants to have a look at that. It's available in browser, but if you haven't got a headset, you can look at it through your computer. You don't have to have a headset to see it, but it is better in virtual reality.
I'd love to. Is there a link that I can share for people to see? Or
there is. I'll give you the link. Yeah. You can just go straight in through your browser. I don't know whether you have to create an account with the software that I use, but it's accessible just through a laptop or a computer. And that's kind of starting to explore. So you'll be able in there, you can see the 3D modeled versions. So on my website, everything's kind of quite 2D, but in there you can actually walk around the fairy lanterns that I've excavated, and you can meet the fairies, the fairy figurines that I've made. So it's quite a nice starting point for that.
That's so exciting. I'll have to send you some of the links to some of my images on Instagram.
That would be brilliant.
Because I've found some amazing fairy faces in trees, woodlands and in rocks, and
it's amazing, these characters that just pop out, and they're full of life. real characters. I'm very excited about finding more of these now. Hopefully. Yeah.
And are you going to, you mentioned about 3D printing some of these artefacts. Is that something that you're planning on doing still?
Yeah, we've done a few. We're hoping to create all of them, all of the 20 that I've found so far. We're going to 3D print all of them using a special, it's not plastic, it's like a special environmentally friendly cornstarch type material that looks like plastic, but it isn't. And then we're going to cover them in clay and paint them. And I'm arranging with Heysham Heritage Centre to have a little exhibition of them with some of the images and some of the little films that I've made to go alongside, so that people who come to visit Heysham can meet find the fairy archaeology that I've been looking at. So I'm really excited to be putting together a mini exhibition, if you like, about that.
It's such an exciting project, Jessie, isn't it? It's really, it lights me up, this kind of approach, creative approach to fairies and connecting with the landscape in this really fresh way that will engage all ages.
I hope so. That's what really excites me about it, is really showing people that there's a lot more. I think that the problem with modern days, that landscapes are seen as just resources that are there to be exploited or to be made money out of, or be dug up or whatever, and to imbue them with a sense of life and character and magic just creates a new connection, or connects us back in a way that perhaps we've lost more recently. And so that's kind of the aim of my work, is to show people that the landscape's culturally important. It's not just stuff. It's stuff that's integral to who we are as individuals and people. Yeah.
Oh, well, that's a wonderful note to end on, I think.
Great. Okay.
Thank you ever so much.
I really enjoyed that. Thank you, Claire. I could talk to you for hours.
It's wonderful. So, could you just share with everyone listening how they can find you online? And obviously I'll put your links in the notes for this show, but if you could just share where people can find you.
Yeah, so I'm just about to start. So I've just created a new digital art studio in Morecambe. We're based in Good Things Collective, which is a wider artist collective. But we have a studio that we're going to be calling Sprite Studios. So I will give you my email for Sprite Studios. So anybody who's interested in, I don't know, whatever you might be interested in talking to me about, hopefully about fairies and VR and archaeology and things like that, you'll be able to contact me via spritestudiomorecambe@gmail.com.
Excellent. Thank you, Jessie. Thanks for your time today. It's been wonderful speaking to you.
Thank you, Claire. I really enjoyed it. Thanks for making my first podcast very enjoyable. Thank you. Goodbye.